Greenland is really important for America strategically.
Is Greenland for sale?
No.
No. We live here. Trump cannot buy Greenland.
In just 6 months, Canada and Europe locked in over $3.1 billion in rare earth and gold projects across Greenland, and not a single U.S. firm was invited. While Washington was still debating ownership and military strategy, Ottawa and Brussels quietly redrew the map of the Arctic economy. The fallout hit fast. Lockheed Martin announced delays to its hypersonic missile test schedule, citing uncertainty in raw material supply. Raytheon began searching for molybdenum and critical alloys in Chile and Australia after realizing Greenland's deposits would now be routed to Europe. Meanwhile, U.S. LNG shipments to Europe stalled as buyers turned toward a new energy corridor forming between Greenland and Canada.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time.
What happened? Trump's push to get Greenland one way or another triggered a global chain reaction, but not the one he expected. Instead of raising an American flag on the Arctic frontier, Canada and the EU seized the moment and turned Greenland into the heart of a multilateral Arctic alliance. Now, Washington is watching from the sidelines as a new power center takes shape. Trump's bold declaration to get Greenland one way or another might have electrified domestic audiences, but it backfired on the global stage. What followed wasn't territorial expansion, it was quiet displacement. Militarily, the Pentagon's response was restrained. Instead of deploying real assets or establishing permanent control, U.S. planners settled on a symbolic gesture, a C-130 landing at Thule Air Base in northern Greenland. It was what analysts called a show-the-flag operation, more of a photo opportunity than a strategy. No new bases, no joint agreements, just optics. And optics alone weren't enough to keep Washington in the game. Meanwhile, Canada and Europe were busy reshaping Greenland's future without a single American player at the table. In March 2025, the government of Greenland approved a $3 billion mining partnership with two Canadian companies, Greenland Resources and Amarok Minerals, to extract molybdenum, gold, silver, and copper. The financing came directly from the European Investment Bank, Norway's sovereign wealth fund, and a network of British private equity firms. In short, American capital was nowhere in sight. More importantly, the extracted materials would be shipped directly to European industrial centers, bypassing U.S. markets entirely. A strategic mineral flow once assumed to be under U.S. influence was now running in the opposite direction. The fallout for American industry was immediate. Lockheed Martin, one of the Pentagon's key defense contractors, announced delays to its hypersonic weapons testing program through 2030, citing sourcing problems with molybdenum-based heat-resistant alloys. Raytheon, another defense giant, began exploring alternative supply chains in Australia and Chile after realizing Greenland's reserves were now locked into Europe-bound contracts. Even clean energy initiatives took a hit. The Inflation Reduction Act, which ties EV tax credits to U.S. sourced components, failed to anticipate Greenland's shift toward a Canada-EU orbit. This oversight triggered disruptions in U.S. battery manufacturing, putting domestic supply chain goals at risk. Diplomatically, the fallout rippled through NATO. In an uncharacteristically bold move, France deployed a nuclear submarine to Baffin Bay, officially for maritime observation. But few doubted it was a signal to Washington not to overstep. Meanwhile, Canada issued a quiet but firm warning: any attempt by the U.S. to pressure Greenland's autonomy could violate the founding principles of the NATO alliance. If one member tried to assert territorial control over another ally's domain, Article 5 could become politically radioactive. For a security bloc built on trust and mutual defense, that warning hit deep. So while Trump doubled down on bold rhetoric, Canada and Europe delivered concrete results. They funded infrastructure. They secured mineral access. They respected Greenland's autonomy.
Greenland, they are never going to get developed by Denmark. They can't afford to, and they'll never be secure with Denmark. And that's what President Trump's not going to allow, is that they're vulnerable. It's like Denmark owns an asset they can't afford to. If you have a house and you can't afford to take care of it, you have to sell it and buy a smaller house. You can't own things you can't afford. It's just the world.
The U.S., on the other hand, was left with flag displays, stalled weapons programs, and growing diplomatic isolation in the Arctic. While the U.S. focused on military gestures and public declarations, Canada and Europe quietly reshaped the Arctic order. Leading the charge was Canada, whose mining firms Greenland Resources and Amarok Minerals secured substantial financial backing from across Europe. These weren't short-term investments. The companies committed to long-term infrastructure development in Greenland, backed by funds from the European Investment Bank, Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund, and UK private equity groups. The centerpiece of this effort was the creation of the Arctic Green Transition Fund, a $3.1 billion initiative aimed at building sustainable mining capacity and renewable energy infrastructure across the Arctic without a single US dollar involved. But the deal wasn't just about money. It came with conditions the US would never have accepted. Under the agreement, 70% of all mining jobs must go to local Greenlanders, and 10% of profits must be deposited into Greenland's future fund in Nuuk, a sovereign investment fund modeled after New Zealand's Maui Fund. These terms weren't just economic, they were political. They represented Greenland's insistence on sovereignty and long-term development over short-term extraction. For Canada and the EU, these were acceptable terms. For Washington, they were a non-starter. Meanwhile, Greenland made its boldest political move in decades. In a rare joint statement with Copenhagen, it declared that the island's sovereignty was not open for negotiation, a direct rebuke to Trump's annexation rhetoric. Then, in July 2025, Greenland's parliament passed the Infrastructure Fallig Act, locking in local labor requirements and profit-sharing rules for all resource projects. The message was clear: any future investor had to respect Greenlandic autonomy and political stability or stay out. Europe was more than willing to comply. The EU's Critical Raw Materials Act, passed in 2023, mandates that at least 25% of the bloc's rare earth imports come from allied ethical sources. Greenland, with its massive mineral potential and political alignment with Denmark, became the perfect match. With Canada providing technical expertise and European institutions supplying capital, Greenland evolved into a geopolitical laboratory, one where sustainable mining, local empowerment, and strategic autonomy were tested in real time. What started as an American campaign for Arctic control has within months turned into a Canada-EU-led transformation of the region. And while Washington pushed for dominance, Ottawa and Brussels built partnership. The result: Greenland is no longer a blank space on America's strategic map. It's a sovereign node in a new Arctic alliance Washington can't easily penetrate. At the heart of this geopolitical standoff lies a personal obsession. During his 2024 campaign, Donald Trump revived one of his most controversial ideas from his first term, the annexation of Greenland. But this time, it wasn't a joke. It was a headline promise, a symbol of American dominance, a legacy-defining goal meant to showcase Trump's strength in the face of rising global competition. After returning to the White House in January 2025, Trump wasted no time. His National Security Council dusted off two Cold War-era documents, the Arctic Gap Protocol, originally drafted under Eisenhower, and the Through Radar Belt Plan from the 1980s. Both envisioned scenarios where the U.S. would secure long-term access or even ownership of Arctic territories, including Greenland. The rationale: military radar coverage, strategic mineral control, and denying Russia and China influence in the polar region. Trump made his intent crystal clear in a March 4th speech to Congress, declaring, "We will get it one way or another." His allies followed suit. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri framed the situation as a zero-sum game. If we don't mine these resources, China will. The argument was simple but incendiary. Greenland's minerals weren't just valuable, they were essential for U.S. national security. But the world wasn't on board. The reaction from Copenhagen was swift and firm. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen reaffirmed that Greenland belongs to the Greenlanders. The Greenlandic government in Nuuk issued a joint statement, with Denmark rejecting any negotiations on sovereignty and warning that any coercive actions from a NATO member would violate the alliance's founding principles. Across Europe, Trump's statements were seen not as strategic moves, but as threats to Arctic stability. Even within the United States, opposition mounted. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, representing America's own Arctic region, warned that militarizing Greenland would backfire both ecologically and diplomatically. Democratic senators from the Northeast expressed concern that Trump's aggressive posture would fracture NATO unity, alienate Canada, and push Europe into deeper partnerships away from the U.S. Rather than reassuring allies, Trump's rhetoric was pushing them into each other's arms. In the end, Trump's Greenland push wasn't just about territory, it was about projecting power. But instead of securing dominance, it triggered resistance from allies, from rivals, and from within his own political base. What he saw as a geopolitical crown jewel was, to much of the world, a line that should never be crossed. Beyond the headlines, beyond the political noise, a deeper transformation is quietly unfolding in the Arctic, and Canada is at the center of it. While Washington made bold declarations, Ottawa built something more lasting. The Arctic Hexagon, stretching from Baffin Island to Devon Island and extending across to Greenland. This emerging network connects mining operations, aerospace infrastructure, and radar surveillance capabilities into a cohesive strategic corridor. What was once cold and fragmented terrain is now becoming Canada's coordinated Arctic sphere of influence. But it's not just about minerals and maps, it's also about energy. Canadian company Cedar Energy is now in advanced talks with European firms to construct a floating LNG liquefied natural gas terminal off the coast of Greenland. This project would allow gas extracted in the Arctic to bypass U.S. territory entirely, sailing directly from Canada-Greenland production sites to Central European markets. It's a logistical revolution, and one with clear geopolitical implications. For countries like Germany, the shift is especially significant. After cutting ties with Russian energy, Berlin had leaned heavily on U.S. LNG exports. But with Trump introducing unpredictable export rules and Greenland's strategic pivot toward Canada and the EU, Germany is now looking to diversify once again, this time toward Canadian Arctic LNG. The result, a slow but real erosion of U.S. energy leverage in Europe. Strategically, Washington's options are narrowing. Any attempt to forcefully assert control over Greenland isn't just politically risky, it's legally complex. Greenland is still part of the Kingdom of Denmark, a full NATO member. That means any U.S. military action, no matter how limited, could trigger NATO's Article 5, the very clause that guarantees collective defense. In other words, the U.S. cannot act unilaterally without potentially facing a crisis within its own alliance. In the long run, this isn't just a story about Greenland. It's about the entire balance of power in the Arctic. With Canada forging economic roots, Europe underwriting green infrastructure, and Greenland asserting political autonomy, the U.S. finds itself on the outside of a region it once assumed it controlled. And as new pipelines, rail links, radar systems, and terminals take shape, so too does a new Arctic Order, one built without Washington at the helm. In the end, Canada and Europe didn't need tanks or treaties to win the Arctic, they just needed capital cooperation and credibility. While Washington framed Greenland as a territory to be claimed, Ottawa and Brussels treated it as a partner to be empowered. They didn't offer ultimatums. They offered infrastructure, environmental safeguards, and indigenous equity models, the very things the U.S. never brought to the table. Trump tried to take Greenland by force of narrative. Canada took it by force of investment, and Europe backed it up with strategic alignment and long-term vision. Today, Greenland is no longer a passive frontier. It's the beating heart of a new multilateral Arctic order. It's no longer about who claims the most territory, but about who offers the most trust, stability, and shared future. And in that game, the U.S. came in with power, but Canada and Europe walked away with the prize. So what does this mean for America's role in the Arctic? Will Washington adapt to this new reality or continue chasing a Cold War playbook in a post-hegemony world? Let us know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep geopolitical breakdowns. Like this video if you believe diplomacy can outmaneuver dominance.